So, archaeology is kind of bullshit, and I don't know what I'm going to title this video, but it's tempting to call it that. I don't know where to start. Uh, these people get in a giant groupthink and determine what they believe to be reality to be, and then defend that position until it's so obviously not true that the general public is making fun of them. And this happens with many things. The prime example of this is Clovis first. The general archaeological consensus was, for 50, 70 years, something like that the first people in the Americas were called the Clovis people, and they made this particular type of point. That's why you find them all over America. Well, now it's pretty demonstrable through a few sites that have been found that that's just flat out not true. That Clovis was a big population explosion, maybe, or that they traveled around a lot. Yeah, if there weren't a lot of them, which there had to have been a lot of them. There's just too many points. But it's gone back so far in dating now that, oh, well, people must have taken boats to get here. Like, well, duh. These people think they know everything about everything. And my experience with archaeology is considerable because that's what I went to school for. And my experiences there led me to the conclusion that I didn't need to be involved in archaeology. You know, I had a professor showing me some stuff from a dig site once, and they're like, we found this brass case and it says Winchester on it, and it must be from like the 1870s and from this famous Indian battle and all this shit. And I take a look at it and it's a 243 Winchester. I told her right then, I'm like, well, the 243 was invented sometime in the mid 1950s, so that's probably not true. I burst her bubble, and she's like, well, really, can you look that up? And I looked it up, and it was like 1957 or something like that. I don't remember the exact year, but you can go look it up. The 243 is a relatively recent cartridge. It's based on the 308 NATO parent case, which hasn't been around that long either. You know, 308 Winchester, I think, was a commercial hunting cartridge in the 30s, something like that. But then it became 7.62 NATO. And right around the time that popularity boom came around, that's when they made 243 as a hunting cartridge. Because everybody liked 270 and they wanted a smaller version of 270. And this is stuff that I just know from living real life, being involved in guns or whatever. And many of these people don't know the first thing about real life at all. They don't know anything about guns. They don't know anything about camping, fishing, hunting, hiking, or anything that these people that they study are doing, and they try to make conclusions about their tools and who they are and what they are based on their weird-ass worldview that is basically being a super lefty college professor. It's a very strange atmosphere. And the real issue that I have with archaeology is it's pretty clear that there's a lack of evidence of older civilizations than recorded history because of the amount of time. So, for example, anything made of metal, whether it's iron, steel, copper, bronze, corrodes in the earth. Like, when exposed to oxygen, this shit starts corroding. You may not notice it in your lifetime, but in 10,000 years, there won't be a steel pot there anymore, right? And for like shipwrecks in the ocean. A shipwreck in the ocean, like the oldest ones we have, are from like the Greeks and the Romans. Why? Because a boat in the ocean doesn't last more than 3,000 or 4,000 years, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years at the outside. Because the salinity in the water mixed with microbes and other shit, it just eats the wood away. And you might find a pile of cargo, but that's really hard to find. Most of the shipwrecks we know about are known wrecks that went down in relatively modern times that they went and found. A few of them are some ancient Roman or Greek ship that they found by happenstance. We're going to get to why this matters in a minute, but the idea that it just recently dawned on them that people probably took boats to America instead of walking across a land bridge through northern Alaska and Canada is just so ridiculous on its face. Like, are there hunter-gatherer tribes? Do they migrate across land riding caribou and shit? Yes. Could some people have gotten here that way? I'm sure they did. But the vast, vast majority of people don't do shit like walk across a continent. You know what they do? They make outriggers and canoes and boats and follow coastlines. And even cross vast expanses of ocean. We know for a fact that the Australians arrived in Australia by boat sometime around 40 or 50,000 years ago. That's an undisputed archaeological fact. But yet they insist that, oh, well, people didn't make it to America until, relatively recent times, 15, 18,000 years ago, whatever the data says now. That's bullshit. There's a place in San Diego where they found a mastodon called the Cerruti Mastodon site that dates to 130,000 years ago. And there's marks on the bones of stone tools. Now, the archaeologists basically contest this whole site as being, well, the bones could have fallen on rocks, they could have been crushed and blah, 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 blah. And no, like when you look at the evidence, there's like saw marks from stone knives on fucking rib bones and leg bones of fucking mastodons. People have been in the New World for a long time. How they get here, where they get here, I don't think we really know. I think it increasingly looks like some people definitely took the land bridge. A very, very small amount of people. Some people definitely made the jump from Kamchatka in Russia to Alaska and followed the coastline down in boats. And some people definitely came across, like the Polynesians and shit did, in outrigger canoes and that kind of shit, all the way across the Pacific. And there's even a chance that some people were on bigger ships or some shit that got lost from China or Japan or some shit and blown out to sea and blew all the way across the Pacific, and some of them managed to live. Now, when did these happen? How did these happen? I don't know. The point is that because of their little groupthink, they don't even recognize this as a fact. And 130,000 years plus is a really fucking long time to be in America. Anything could have happened in that time. Empires rise and fall within a 500-year period all the time. Now, looking at lost civilizations from that age, what would be left? Well, stone tools, rock structures, those mammoth bones or mastodon bones with marks on them, some of them survived. Pottery turns to dust most of the time over that amount of time. You might have some particularly well-fired piece of pottery that's in pieces that you might find. There's not going to be massive evidence of a civilization. And the massive evidence that there is going to be giant megalithic rock structures, if they're there at all. Like if our civilization disappeared today, or we all died or something happened, in 10,000 years the only thing left of us would be Mount Rushmore and probably some wreckage of like the Hoover Dam. Giant blocks of concrete that are broken apart. So knowing that, let's take a look at some of the weird shit around the world. Okay, for example, the Great Pyramid in Egypt, which the only evidence dating it to the time that they say it's dated to is, I think, a couple of scraps of wood they found inside the pyramid and a charcoal writing on the wall of the name of Khufu found by Colonel Weiss. Colonel Weiss, who spent a shitload of money to establish an expedition to Egypt to discover who built the Great Pyramid. And in his journals for like the 3 weeks prior to finding the name on the inside of the pyramid, was greatly concerned about his financial ruin if he didn't figure out who was going to build the Great Pyramid. I'm not saying that means that Colonel Weiss faked that name on that wall, but I'm saying that Colonel Weiss faked that name on that wall. It was written in fucking charcoal. Like, now you could probably radiocarbon date the charcoal. They won't ever do that. You know, they don't want to add fuel to this particular fire. The pyramid itself is a giant fucking mystery. The technology to build it doesn't exist today, much less 5,000 or 10,000 years ago whenever it was built. Like, whoever built that pyramid probably had a level of technology higher than ours in some ways, or lower than ours in other ways. Like, it's hard to judge a civilization based on their tech, but if we just judge it based on moving stones, there are stones in the Great Pyramid that are 3 times bigger than the biggest stone ever moved by modern man. And they did that with giant trailers and machines and shit like that, and we're barely able to get a stone from like New Mexico or someplace like that to California. And there's one that went from like Sweden to Russia. Those stones were somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 350 tons. The stones that make up the roof of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid are 1,000 tons. So, if it is possible to move that shit with, you know, wooden rollers and whatever, then do it. You know, go carve a big stone and show us how, you know, a slave army with rollers can move this shit. And not just move it across a room, that's probably doable. They took these stones and moved them over 1,000 miles from quarries in Aswan, which is in southern Egypt, all the way to where they are now at the Great Pyramid. If we wanted to put those stones back today, I don't think we would be able to do that. So who the fuck built that pyramid? And this is where the enlightened archaeologists crack me up, because they don't even listen to what native people say. Like, they say stuff and it goes in one ear and out the other. If you ask the Arabs who built that pyramid, they all say Saurit, which is Enoch from the Bible. And that's as good of an answer as any, really. It's better than their answer. Enoch was like the great-great-grandfather of Noah or some shit like that, which would put it before the flood. And for those going, well, there was no flood. There was a flood at the end of the last ice age. All of the low-lying areas of Earth flooded. Did the whole Earth flood? Not exactly. Did Noah have a giant ark of every animal on Earth to save the planet? No, not exactly. Like, some of these stories have gotten ridiculous over the years, too. And you have to kind of have an interpretive eye to look at them. But the fact that every culture around the world has a flood myth is because at the end of the last ice age, the fucking planet flooded. And a lot of the evidence for a ice age or prior civilization is going to be along the coasts of the continents as they were in the ice age. And everything that isn't is probably the giant stone monoliths and shit that we keep finding, that we attribute to newer civilizations. And we do that despite the fact that some of these civilizations say point blank, we didn't build this. For example, the Aztecs in Mexico, when you ask them who built Teotihuacan or Tenochtitlan, they say that those are cities of the gods and that they found them and inhabited them. They don't say they built them. But archaeologists go, well, poor stupid native man in a grass skirt, of course you built these. You just don't know your own capabilities. Which is more likely? That they built a giant fucking series of pyramids that are a mock-up of the universe or solar system as it can be viewed, or that was done by a much higher tech civilization. with their astronomical knowledge, could they have done that? Sure. But again, we come to the moving of the stones and shit, and some of these stones, it's evident that there's multi-layers of construction. There's evident that there's multi-times of occupation. Particular in like Machu Picchu, there's 3 distinct layers of construction. The earliest and bottom layer are giant stone monoliths that are, perfectly fit together. The next layer are slightly smaller stones, also pretty much perfectly fit together. And the third layer is bricks. Any bets on which one of those layers was added by the Incans? I'm going to go with the bricks. And that means they're probably it's the third time that place has been inhabited. And the same thing goes for Egypt. The same thing goes for the Aztecs. The same thing goes for some of the places in India and China and Cambodia. Like, archaeologists are kind of fucking stupid. And they like to look at this whole thing as, well, there's always evidence in the ground of something. Well, you say that because you that's what you do. You dig up stuff out of the ground. As someone that like does metallurgy and other shit, I'm sitting here going, yeah, how long does metal last? Our whole modern civilization is made of metal and plastic. How long do those things last? Well, how do we know they had metal and plastic? Well, we don't really, but like, it's possible. It's 100% possible. And if we blinked out of existence today, the last styrofoam cup would disappear sometime 500 or 600 years from now. Okay? The last metal pot or knife or whatever would disappear a few thousand years from now. The steel girders that our giant buildings are made out of would turn to dust within 5,000 years, 6,000 years. It's ridiculous on its face. So if you really want to make something last, giant megalithic stone construction is pretty much the way to go. And it's pretty obvious that whatever these civilizations were that preceded our current, like back to the Sumerians 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, modern recorded history, whatever was before that wanted to leave something behind to say that they were there. I think that's why they did some of these megalithic stone constructions. Either that, or they just thought it was cool, or it was easy for them. It's some combination thereof. And if you go looking at like the likes of Graham Hancock, which I like, but I don't entirely agree with because he gets kind of woo-woo on some shit and is all like, these were shamans that were spreading knowledge all around the earth. Probably not. Just guessing. But his whole thing is that there was a seafaring civilization. And one of the big arguments against this is, we haven't found the shipwrecks. Well, if this was 20,000 years ago, you wouldn't find a single shipwreck. You might find some pile of pots on the bottom of the ocean, but my guess is you would attribute that to the Romans, or insert other civilization here. And this happens all the fucking time in archaeology. Undateable shit that we don't really know where it came from, that is right beside shit from the Romans, Egyptians, or Mayans, Aztecs, whatever, gets attributed to those civilizations because there's no way to say it's older because it's made of rock or it's pots on the bottom of the ocean. And that's ridiculous. It's pretty obvious that some of these primitive cultures didn't build some of this shit. For example, Baalbek is a place in Lebanon where the Romans built a temple to Jupiter. They built it on top of some giant stone slabs that had been there for millennia. Okay? The archaeologists say, well, the Romans moved those stones there. Well, these stones are like 2,000 tons or something like that. They're ridiculous in size. Whoever built that shit had a higher level of technology than we currently have, probably. And we just have zero evidence of them being around because of how long ago it was. Again, People had boats at least 40,000 years ago. People somehow made it to America 130,000 years ago. People have been fully modern humans for somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 to 500,000 years. It's best estimates at this point. How many times could empires have risen and fallen? You know, from the discovery of the New World, basically, in 1492, till now, is like 500 years-ish. Our entire civilization has spawned in that time. And from, 1909 or whatever it was at Kitty Hawk, where the Wright brothers first flew, in 100 years we've been to the moon, if you believe that. What could these people have accomplished in 250,000 years? But you don't get it. We have all this evidence of stone tools and hunter-gatherers. I think what you're looking at there is there's always hunter-gatherer tribes on the planet. There are some living right now. Okay? And when these big civilizations crumble and fall, some percentage of their people survive and revert back to hunter-gatherer and are making stone tools again. Whether it's a nuclear war or some comet impact or a flood, whatever the thing is that makes their whole civilization end, I think it happens. Some sort of event like that happens regularly enough on this planet that it's happened many times, and we've reverted back to hunter-gatherers many times. And there's lots of evidence for that because of that. Now, are some periods and places better than others? Like the Clovis people here in North America, very clearly, that was all one culture. They're all teaching each other how to make that same tool. And I'm not saying that there was a giant, modern civilization in North America at the time of the Clovis people. What I am saying is, if there was one 20,000 years before the Clovis people, you wouldn't fucking know it. There's no way to know it other than giant stone architecture, which they either attribute to much more modern civilizations or completely say is not man-made. They found a giant wall somewhere in Montana in the last 20 years that has become a bigger deal. I forget what they call that wall. I don't know if that's man-made or not. It looks like it could go either way. But some parts of it definitely look like not nature. It's in a perfectly straight line. There's lots of straight cuts stacked on top of each other. If that thing is a remnant of some ancient civilization, it's so fucking old that it's barely recognizable as being human-made. It's probably older than the pyramids and older than anything else we have on Earth. And there's other weird shit, like genetically. They're finding Aboriginal DNA from Australia in South American native populations that have no contact, modern or past, with them. What's up with that? What's up with the various peopling of America and how that happened? I think some of this could be answered by they've been here a really fucking long time, 130 plus thousand years, and there were civilizations even here at points that had some sort of global travel like we have today to some extent, whether it's, sailing ships like the 17th century or fucking airplanes. It's kind of hard to tell because none of that shit lasts. Literally, I was talking about shipwrecks only lasting a few thousand years. Well, a plane crash or whatever doesn't even last that long. Aluminum degrades back into fucking aluminum oxide really quick. There's not going to be a single scrap of aluminum left on the earth 200 or 300 years from now that we are using today. Back in the 1700s, they put a ball of aluminum, 1800s, whenever they did this. It was when they built the Capitol. They put a ball of aluminum at the top of the Capitol because it was the rarest metal on Earth and considered to be super expensive. Why? Because it was hard to refine, and you had to refine it out of ores, and no one was doing that back then. And in its natural state, aluminum converts back to aluminum oxide relatively quickly, so It's not like there's just piles of it laying around like there's gold. All of this is to say, was there an Atlantis? Probably not as you think of it. But I contend that Atlantis was all across the fucking globe. You know, there's some civilization somewhere in the past that is considerably more modern than what we think of today. Whether that's airplanes or 17th century sailing ships, I don't know where on that scale they fall, but looking at their stone constructions, it seems like they must have been crazy advanced compared to us. Or they were done by the gods or the space aliens. There's not too many fucking answers to this question, really. If you read the shit the Sumerians wrote and take it at face value, some of it is like the wildest science fiction. That, you know, the gods came down from heaven or space, if you will, and created man in their image and built all of this shit. And I don't know if I believe that, but I believe that more than I believe the story I'm being told by the archaeologists. And this is where the ancient alien people have a foothold in, you know, truth. Is you are being lied to on some level about the ancient history of the planet. Is the truth aliens? I don't fucking know. All I know is that it's weird. And some of this is just archaeologists being archaeologists because they don't believe anything fucking crazy. Some of this seems to be a concerted effort on the part of, I don't know, secret groups that run the world to hide this shit for some reason. And I'm wondering if it's not, you know, we don't want people thinking the Bible is more true than they already do, or if it's, hey, we don't want people knowing about this ancient civilization because that's where the UFOs come from. You know, according to the Sumerians, before the flood happened, the gods left the planet. What if they were this advanced civilization with some sort of crazy flying machines and space stations or underwater bases or crazy shit like that, and the ones that could get in one of those ships and leave did, and now we're running into their descendants that we're seeing as like the Roswell gray aliens because they've been living in space this whole time. This is on the level of shit that's probably being hidden in this shit. And I don't really know what to believe anymore on it. All I know is when I'm being lied to, and I'm being lied to about ancient Egypt, I'm being lied to about the various monolithic stone constructions around the planet. You know, if there was no civilization in the Ice Age, then how do you explain the flooded cities off the coast of India? Like, the one place I think there's the best evidence for this is in India, where it's pretty clear there was a civilization there on the level that there was, you know, a few thousand years ago that lived on the coast of India. We don't know anything about it because the only thing that's left are these submerged cities. And underwater archaeology is expensive, time-consuming, and not done much. And when it is done, it's done on shipwrecks. And some of these cities, the last time they were above water was before the Ice Age, which would put modern civilized society all the way back to that time frame. And that's kind of my argument, is that there was somebody who was able to build a city, at least, around 20,000 years ago. I don't think that's that crazy. Based on some of the evidence, I think you could get considerably crazier than that. And the ancient aliens people damn sure do a good job. As far as them being high-tech, what if their only technology that they had that was high-tech was the stone construction shit? I find that severely unlikely, but possible. Like, again, not all routes to high-tech or civilization look the same. There are fairly big societies that never had the wheel. Okay? However, to build some of these things that they built, you would have to have metallurgy, you would have to have a pretty modern understanding of science, astronomy. Some of these structures are perfectly aligned north-south on a fucking globe that changes near constantly. And it looks like they were even more perfectly aligned 10 or 20,000 years ago. Some of them are in star constellations, or in the example of the Aztecs, it's our solar system mapped out in pyramids. You know, there's the temple of the sun, the temple of the moon. There's a temple for each fucking planet. What were the point or purpose of these things? We don't really know. And it's sort of like, did the Aztecs use them as like sacrificial places? I'm sure they did. But at the same time, the Aztecs also say that it's the city of the gods. So, do you believe native cultures or not? And that's something that these fucking archaeologists preach all the time, is that, you know, indigenous cultures should be respected and they know things and whatever. But then when it comes to, oh, we didn't build that, that was built by the gods, they don't listen to that, because that's fucking crazy talk. You built that, you just don't remember. Bullshit. Who and what are they calling the gods? Are they calling ancestors from 50,000 years ago gods? Are they calling fucking aliens gods? Like, what is this? I had this same debate once with my archaeology professor, who was making fun of Ancient Aliens and Eric von Daniken, and my point that I brought up was that his original thought, which is, basically, there's this giant universe, there's probably alien life somewhere in it. If it is, could it be more advanced than us, and could it have traveled here in the past and done some sort of mineral survey or something, and maybe created some of these giant stone structures to aid in such things in some way, or to dock spaceships on, or do something that mattered to them. And we have no memory or record of this other than, well, the gods built those, because that's all anyone would remember after a, 1,000 generations. There were people that came from the sky that built giant stone things. That's probably about all you'd have. The telephone game is strong, That's why you should both trust native and ancient sources and view them through the lens of, what of this is bullshit? Kind of like the Noah's Ark story. Did he have every animal on Earth? Probably not. Did he have animals on his boat? Probably. Was Noah a real person? Was his name Noah? He was probably a real figure, one of many who survived the flood on some sort of boat, whether it's by prior knowledge or just he was a crazy boat dude and had a fucking boat. How many rich people today do we know that have yachts? Noah could have been the 20,000 years ago version of a crazy yacht millionaire who, when the flood started, filled his boat with all his possessions and all of his farm animals and went out to sea. I think that's pretty fucking likely compared to the traditional Noah story. I don't know what the truth they're hiding in our past is, but I find it fascinating. And when I see people mock these pseudoscientists, as they call them, like Graham Hancock or whoever, that bring up these points, some of their points are pretty easy to mock because of, like, Graham Hancock's, well, they were probably shamans and they were spreading shit across the globe. Okay. The one hole in the whole theory of having a global civilization is that corn and potatoes and tomatoes all came from the Americas. Wheat and various other plants came from Europe and Asia. Various other things came from Africa. All of these food crops, why weren't they spread across the world by the civilization? That's a pretty good hole, right? But if the civilization was 50,000 years ago and people were wiped out back to the Stone Age, corn isn't going to survive outside of its native habitats. Corn reverts into wild corn pretty fucking quickly, believe it or not. Wild corn is like these little tiny things with little bitty seeds that It doesn't look anything like our corn today. Corn is a genetically modified crop, basically, by semi-modern humans. They bred those plants to have bigger seeds. So if it's no longer an evolutionary advantage, it becomes a disadvantage, and it's going to be deselected for. And how long does that take? On the terms of corn, not very long. You can find this out by where corn has gone wild again. It shrinks back down, or it dies off if it's like in the Middle East. You know, you don't see a lot of corn farming going on in fucking Iraq. Through our modern technologies, we can grow some of these crops various places on the world that they just don't naturally grow. The potato is harder to explain. It's like it's such a good food and survives so well in so many climates. I don't know why that wasn't spread around. Could be that their civilization just wasn't globe spanning like ours. It could be that they had some sort of technology for moving stones that we don't understand, that is more primitive than we would like to believe. But no matter what, whoever built those giant stone construction pyramids or megaliths or whatever you want to call them was significantly higher tech than hunter-gatherers, and definitely had cities, definitely had boats, definitely had money, that sort of shit. Like, you can assume a lot about what they must have had. There's a lot of questions about what could they have had, or how advanced could they have been, including some places in the Middle East and India that literally look like people got nuked. Like, how many of these civilizations have developed the atomic bomb? How many of the resets of civilization have been due to global wars? And if it was some global nuclear war, does that affect the climate on the planet enough to wipe out enough plants to where not everything survives all places, and that's why the food isn't spread around? These are just good questions to ask, I think. And they're the sort of shit that gets completely mocked by archaeologists, who are themselves worthy of mockery, in my opinion. They are pseudo-historians, pseudo-scientists themselves. They are obsessed with everything pre-5000 BC being hunter-gatherers. They can't get over the fact that maybe man was a little bit more advanced than that at some point, and maybe they can't find the evidence of that because archaeology itself is a flawed science. It's a flawed science in that beyond a certain date range, not much survives. You know, I don't know how many archaeologists I've talked to that were seed experts or something like that. I'm like, well, how far back can you really find seeds from? They're like, oh, throughout all of written human history, at least. I'm like, well, you sure about that? Like, how long does a seed really last? Oh, probably 7,000 years or so. And how long do we have seeds from? Oh, about 7,000 years. Like, that's my point. Like, we don't know anything about what people were using as seed crops, if they were using them as that, pre 7,000 years ago, and there's a 500,000 years of human history. Like, do the math on this. People probably figured out farming at some point in that fucking 500,000 years. People are not stupid. Farming isn't that complicated of a thing to figure out. You know, especially if they did really build those giant stone pyramids and shit. If you completely discount all of that shit, I would put it to you that there were at least small cities and farming communities and shit like that at some point in the past that we have absolutely no record of. Anyway, archaeology is bullshit and pseudoscience, and you should take anything they say with a grain of salt. There's a lot of arguments on both sides of this, but most of the arguments on the side of the archaeologists completely ignore the fact that humans, when they go into an area and find big stone structures, re-inhabit those places. We take shelter that is already made, right? When you go looking for some place to like make a survival shelter, do you go to the hardest possible place to make it, or do you go to like a rock shelter that was used by indigenous people if it's available? You always take the rock shelter. It's already fucking built for you. So how long has that site been inhabited? As long as people have been walking the earth in that area. I would put it to you that the same thing is true of those giant stone structures. As soon as people see them, they're like, hey, let's hang out here. And they could have been inhabited a dozen times since they were built. And you only really have evidence of the last couple. And you merge all of that together into evidence that these people obviously built these pyramids. Which could probably not be farther from the truth. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my little rant about archaeology. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. But it's a ridiculous science. I'll see you guys later.